Thank you very much, and thank you very much for saying that I'm a younger researcher, because I am constantly reminded that I'm only barely hanging on to my status in the Young Researchers group in Australia. So I very much appreciate that plug. Now, I guess looking back over this presentation today, I've realised that I've got about half an hour's worth of content in 20 minutes, so I am going to rush through this today. So I'll get right into it, hopefully. That's not me walking up the stairs, by the way. I don't know who he is. So I guess to start off with, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I did create this presentation. Online qual is really a technique that I'm very passionate about, but I worry that a lot of people perhaps tried it when it was early and a new thing and had a bad experience and have dismissed it, or just they're just too afraid to start off. So what I've tried to do, I guess, with this presentation and day to day is really talk about why I think it is such a great technique. I've been working with online qual since about 2004. And over that time, I guess I've made a lot of mistakes, and I think that it is a technique where there's a sharp learning curve going in, and then once you've kind of sussed out the unique and perhaps different challenges of online qual, then it is a great technique to use. So I wrote this presentation to share what I've learned over the years, and I hope it will encourage some people to try it out, or perhaps try it again and overcome some of those barriers. But first of all, I want to go into a little bit on why I used online qual in the first place. There we go. So I think it's really important to have a good think about why you're going to recommend online qual in the first place. So there's nothing worse than seeing online qual recommended just because it's something new and flashy. That's possibly the worst case scenario, just recommending it for the technique's sake, or to try and do something a little bit different that's going to, I guess, be shiny and new to attract the client. There really does need to be a solid research basis for recommending online qual. There's got to be something there in the research objectives or the questions is the sort of thing. I think that online qual's research strength is really its asynchronous nature, and what I mean by that is the fact that it's not synchronous, it's not running, you're not all talking at the same time. It allows participants to go away and think about issues and come back and respond. And I think that offers a lot of benefit. So it allows, as I say here, for some more considered and reflective responses. It gives less confident participants a chance to voice their views, and that's feedback that I get at the end of nearly every board that I run, is participants saying, thank you for that opportunity, it gave me some time to actually make sure I did get my points across, because often I'm, just a little bit overwhelmed by other participants in a focus group. It also, I find, increases participants' comfort with disagreeing. So they are a little bit more comfortable voicing the negative or disagreeing with participants because they're not there, they're just in a confrontational situation. It also provides that level of anonymity. So it gives people, along the same vein, the freedom to express different views. And I think also it really does work well in partnership with face-to-face and synchronous qualitative research. So the online qual gives that reflective view, whereas synchronous does give that spontaneous and more instant view. And I think that they're two different and both equally important sides of the story. Before I go into my tips, I guess I wanted to just tell you a little bit about what my approach to online qual tends to look like, because I think there are, as I think I said on the first slide, there are many different approaches, and I don't think there's a right way of approaching it, but this is my way of approaching it. So I tend to run what I call an online discussion forum, and they tend to last between about 3 to 10 days. So I'm certainly not doing your bigger market research online communities, your MROC, with the larger number of participants, or the longer term engagement. But saying that, the project could be longer, it could be shorter. It really just depends on the objectives and what you need to get covered in the time that you're allowing. My participants are given a specific number of tasks to complete in that one day, and that can be a combination of task types. So I try to, I guess, make it a little bit interesting for them to participate. So whether it's a forum discussion, a photo upload, you can use things like polling, I guess just to get a bit of a temperature check. But I'm normally only dealing with about 30 to 40 participants, so it's certainly not a quantitative exercise in terms of polling. I tend to use I guess you need to make the platform work for you when it comes to your online projects. So I use a combination of closed private activities, so ones that the respondent and myself can only see the responses to, versus open and public activities, so ones that are open to the entire platform and to all of the members of the discussion. And that really helps get a balanced picture of the issues. So some things you might want to ask firstly in a closed way, so that participants feel comfortable and can have that level of disclosure that's not going out to the big group. And then you find that the public face, the discussion face, will give you a slightly different answer and give you another picture in terms of the issue. So they can be quite useful to work together. I think another thing that's really important is having an iterative discussion plan. And what I mean by that is don't write a discussion plan a week before the online platform, upload it, and then just have it automatically load each day without actually checking with it and making sure that you, I guess, are taking on board the participants' responses from the day before. So they may have already answered a question on day 1 that you're going to ask on day 3. So it's really important to make sure that you acknowledge that you're listening to their feedback and mix up the discussion guide and adapt it based on what they're saying. It's also really important to have active moderation in my board. So I think they need to know that they're not just responding to the internet. They need to know they're responding to a person, a real person who is listening to what they're saying. So you need to acknowledge contributions, particularly on the first day, just so that they know you're there, and be quite responsive to queries. Because if they feel that you're not there listening, then what's the point of them contributing? All right, so moving quickly on to my 7 big tips. So the things that I wish I'd known before I started going into online calls. Number 1. Oh, thank you, Kilios. All right, there we go. So the first one, the presentation was listening to it. So the presentation. So the first tip is to start out slow. I think this tip in itself has made my online qual life just so much easier. It was such a, I guess, a watershed moment when we said, why don't we just make the first day a little bit less intensive? Because I think, you're sitting there, you're waiting there for the respondents to log in. You've got clients waiting there for the respondents to log in, and they might not do it until later on in the evening. So it's really good just to make this day quite an easy day, maybe just some profile questions, some signing up process, and it lets you iron out any of the technical kinks. And make sure that you have the participants on the board before you actually reach any critical tasks. On that first day, I mean, so many things can actually go wrong on your first day, so it is important just to have that buffer in there. If you've got wrong email addresses for participants, or if participants and the platform have issues using a particular browser on the board, or there are issues with your setup, so you've done something incorrect when you've been setting up the platform itself. Just by having this buffer day in there where they're just logging in, getting a feel for it, just allows you to iron out those technical pieces before you move into the board proper. The second tip is not to panic. I think this is the other thing that you learn with online calls. You do need nervous feel, because I think the most challenging part of the project is the first 7 hours. You sit there, you send out the invites, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and no one logs on. Because whilst this is the most important thing in your week this week, it's probably not the most important thing in the participant's week. And they'll probably log on at lunchtime, or they might log in after work, or they might log in when the kids go to sleep at night. So you're not going to see a sudden burst of response when you first send out your invite. So it's really, I guess, a matter of managing both your own and also your client's expectations in terms of your anticipated logging in and response rate in the first few hours of the board. One thing that you might want to consider with the online poll is delaying when you send out your client invites. So do kind of factor in the slower uptake and the slower log-on period, and perhaps wait until you have got a few people logging in and responding before you send out those client invites, just so then they've got that level of comfort and they're not sitting there panicking that their first foray into online poll is going to be a disaster. So it's just about managing those expectations. I mean, and certainly, whilst I say don't panic, it is important to have contingency plans. So what if your participants don't log in? What if there are issues accessing the platform and things like that? What are you going to do to overcome those issues? Just have plans in place, and that'll make sure that you don't run into trouble later on. Right. Tip 3. Remember who you're talking to. I think a bad habit that I've fallen into writing my face-to-face discussion guides is perhaps using some marketing shorthand. So rather than actually writing the questions that I'm planning on asking the respondents in consumer language, I might say, I might use, does this resonate, or things like that, which is not the question that I'm going to ask, but it's the thing that I want to find out. But it's really important when you're writing a discussion plan for online poll that you don't slip into that bad habit of using marketing lingo, because you really need to be consumer friendly in your language, and that sounds self-evident, but sometimes we don't even catch ourselves doing it. It's also really important, and I've said here to be clear, friendly and chatty in tone, but just to make yourself a real person. You don't have, I guess, that first 5-10 minutes of the group where you sit there and build rapport and, I guess, build a sense of common purpose with your respondents. So you need to do that through your tone and your presentation in the platform. So upload a photo, be friendly, be informal in your tone, so that you're a lot more relatable, and again, you're building that sense of common purpose, so everyone's working towards getting this project completed with the best possible outcome. Ooh, this is a good one. So be honest and realistic in your expectations. This is an area where you can really fall down, because you really do need to think about how long it will take a real person to do this task. And that sounds a bit weird, because obviously we're all real people, aren't we? But what I mean by that is not everybody spends all day in front of a computer using Microsoft Office programs. Many people that you want to be engaging in these online forums are not going to have the same level of computer proficiency as you have. So tasks that you think may take you 5 minutes to complete may actually take your participants a little bit longer. So have a sit down and really think about whether these tasks are as easy as you think they are. You really do need to respect your participants' time, even more so than you would in a face-to-face engagement, because you're not there. So, you haven't got them locked in the room for 2 hours. They can quite easily not log in if they think that you're taking too much of their time and more time than you promised to take. So you really need to make sure that your tasks will take as long as you think they will take, and also actively monitor the board for any comments of this is taking longer than I thought, and follow those participants up to make sure that you're not going to lose them halfway through the project. So I've already alluded to this tip a little bit, and that's just to make sure you do get your tone right. It needs to be chatty, but you also need to be clear. You need to resist the temptation to ask too many questions in the one activity, because, again, you're not there to make sure that they're going to answer the question that you're asking. So you may think you've written the clearest question otherwise out there, that people will answer the question that they want to answer rather than perhaps the question you've written. So what you need to make sure of each task or activity is asking about one thing, but you may also need to ask that one thing in multiple ways. and just really make sure that, and also again monitor the first couple of responses to that question just to make sure that you are getting the responses to the question that you intended to ask. Because there's no good getting there the next day and finding out everyone's gone off on a tangent. That wasn't your intention. Now this is another worthwhile tip, and I think everyone's doing this a little bit differently. But one thing I have found very useful in my platforms is to structure my incentives. So rather than saying it's going to cost X amount for the 10 days or 3 days or whatever, actually breaking it down for the respondents and saying, you'll get this much for logging on, you'll get this much for the next 2 days, and you'll get this much for the next 2 days. Because you do find in these platforms it's very rare to get, and I mean it would be lovely if they did, but realistically it's very rare to get everyone through the entire platform. There is always going to be some attrition because things come up. You know, people go to hospital, all sorts of things happen. So you need to kind of work out a way of how you're going to incentivize those respondents, but also how you're going to motivate them to complete the project when their week gets busy. So maybe you want to backload the incentives so they get more for finishing off tasks that are over the weekend, for instance. And then it just makes it really crystal clear at the end how you are actually going to incentivize them. Also, you've got to really think about, and this is really important to think about right at the beginning when you're costing your project, how you're going to pay your participants, because they aren't coming into a focus group room and you can't just hand them an envelope. So are you going to do a bank transfer? Is your company set up to do bank transfers, or are you going to give them a gift voucher, or are you going to send them a check? And if so, have you cost for things like payments? Because that's somewhere where your costing sheets can definitely go a little bit south if you haven't kind of thought about those types of things. And the last thing is you really need to consider your topic and your target. So, and this goes back to one of my very first points about, you know, don't recommend online qual for online qual's sake, but really think about whether it is the right approach for your topic and your target. So is the topic significantly engaging enough to motivate people to participate? I think, you know, trying to engage someone for a week-long bulletin board on a topic that they have very little interest in, or they're not going to get anything out of it, is going to be very hard, and you're going to have to pay quite a large incentive. I've heard of people having issues doing online with, say, non-users of the product, or people who have abandoned the product. And again, I would argue that perhaps that wouldn't be the right forum to engage those people, because you need to have, there needs to be enough in it for them to come back each day to participate. You also need to think about how savvy your target demographic is. So a lot of the newer platforms have excellent, fantastic tools that researchers get very excited about, so mobile uploads or webcams or all different types of things. But just think about whether your participants are realistically going to be able to use those tools, because if they're not, then you're going to spend half your week doing technical support, which again will blow out your costs. So you really need to have a think about whether your participants are going to be up for that. And also, I guess, another thing to really think about, the point here that the best online participants are not necessarily who you think. So I think this speaks to a point on my next slide, that I've heard a lot about you can only do online qual with youth or tech savvy or that type of thing. And that's not necessarily the case. I've had great success doing work with baby boomers, retirees, and stay-at-home mums, just because they are, I guess, engaging on the computer, and they do have a little bit of time during the day, some of those groups, to participate. So don't necessarily rule out groups and think that this is a technique only for the youth and the tech savvy. Now, I also wanted to challenge 3 big myths, because I think these can also be quite detrimental to trial, or perhaps the retrial of online qual. The first one that I see people getting burnt by quite a lot is the belief that online qual is going to be cheaper to face-to-face qualitative research, and that's often not the case. So whilst you are losing things like room costs, travel costs, that type of thing, you are having to pay for platform hire. And there's also, I guess, you do get a lot of data out of the internet, out of the project, which means that you're going to have increased analysis time as well. So the belief that online follows cheaper than face-to-face is often a little bit flawed, so you really need to give that a bit of thought. Bigger is better is again not always the case, because you just end up with volumes and volumes of data, and data overload can be a really big issue here. I find 30 to 40 is a good number for me to manage as a single moderator. Any more than that, then I would be wanting at least one other backup following responses and probing as well, because otherwise you're just not going to get through your participants in that shorter period of time. And I've already spoken to the last point, so it's not necessarily only suited for particular demographics. I think it's more about the research problem than the demographic, and that's how you can judge the appropriateness of the technique. So just summing up, because as I said, lots to go through and I'm already running out of time. I'd love to sum up, come on. I guess this is just a quick summary of why I love this technique. I think it's a really good technique for topics that require consideration and reflection. So the things, I find it very good for state of the nation type of stuff. So what's going on in 2011? How has it changed? What's been the effect of the GFC? Where people have a little bit of time to go away and ponder these issues and come back. I find that it works really well for that type of work. I think it really does nicely complement the offline approaches, as I said, so getting both that spontaneous through face-to-face poll and then the more considered through the online. Whilst I said it's not necessarily cheaper, it can be really cost-effective for a wide geographic reach. One study I did was with Australian expats all over the world, and you know, it would have been impossible to reach those people face-to-face, but we were able to bring them into the one platform and talk to each other, and in that situation it did make more sense. You get a lot of engagement from the participants. I always get a lot of sorrow at the end of my group, end of my platforms about the experience being over, and people really enjoying, I guess, getting in there and getting to know the other participants as well as participating in the project. Anyone that's seen an online bulletin board transcript will attest to the fact you get rich and, well, you get voluminous outputs, but I find that they are rich and detailed because people are putting in the thought and really getting engaged with the board. It's iterative and adaptable, so you can modify the approach as you're going through based on the respondents' responses, which is excellent. And you also get great client engagement because your clients can sit there and watch the research unfold as well, and they can be involved in the process of changing and adapting the research as it goes along. So I think that that's another great benefit of the approach. So thank you, everyone. That's my very quick summary of why I love online qual and the things I wish I knew before I started.